at the center.
Yeah.
Where
Radical
Jesus is.
and extreme are kind of two different things in their like basic meaning, you know.
Sure, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because radical is about getting to the roots.
Right.
It's fundamental. So we hew close to Jesus and to his church, you know, totally committed to the magisterium, the teaching authority of the church. You know, we don't brook dissent. And so a corollary of that is that we don't pander and sort of you know, sell like dire catastrophe and paranoia.
Right.
Our help is in the name of the Lord, you know, and in Mary, his mother. So this Queen of May campaign, we're trying to raise $50,000, and that's because we have a group of really generous donors who have already put up $50,000 in pledges. If we can manage to get that matched, so that $50,000 that's been pledged, we won't see that if we don't manage to raise $50,000 by our own lights, and that's part of what this is about. If you are registered over at the website, you've been hearing from me for the past couple of weeks. I've been sending out fundraising emails, but then we're also doing these live streams in an effort to reach new users who maybe are not necessarily familiar with what we do over at CatholicCulture.org, or maybe aren't on the email list.
Right, because there's this whole, you know, cohort.
Yeah.
A word that I haven't said very often, apparently. Cohort of people who, you know, they might be subscribers to the podcast on, you know, their podcast app, or they might be subscribers to the YouTube channel, but have never checked out the website, you know.
Yeah.
And so it's this whole thing, as you said, it's bigger than just the podcast.
Right.
The podcasts are relatively new, I guess like 5 years old at this point, but by comparison to the website, which has been around since 2003, and the podcast started in 2018.
Yeah.
So
if you haven't checked out the website, I definitely encourage you to do that, and register for one of our newsletters. I've been following CatholicCulture.org since before I was working for the website, even before you were. You know, of course, I was familiar with it. So you know, just to sum this all up, I think we have about $20,000 raised so far. We've got about 30,000 left. I think last I checked, it was like 29,500 or something.
Good.
Yeah. But the thing is, we got 9 days left.
Oh,
so we're
good point.
we're in the home stretch of the days left, and there's still quite a sizable amount to fundraise.
And you decided you wanted a shorter campaign so that we'd be annoying people with fewer fundraising emails and trying to raise the money we need in a shorter amount of time. Right. Yeah, and also giving a little more value instead of just asking for money, which is part of the reason we're doing these live streams where people will be able to interact and ask questions. And,
yes.
We're not just going to be talking about fundraising for an hour.
And it's also why the whole campaign is couched within a greater call to prayer and to trust.
Great
you know,
point,
because if you can't give, totally understand, but pray. Every prayer is critical. Please pray for the church, pray for our Catholic mission, you know, and not just for the success of our fundraising campaign, but pray that we stay faithful to our Lord. You know, it's a great responsibility doing a Catholic apostolate like this. And so we definitely want you to be a part of that. So support us, whether by your prayers or by your financial support. You can go to CatholicCulture.org/donate/audio to donate, or you can donate over PayPal. I think we've got a link in the description. Yeah. And then I guess there's also a way to super chat. You could give us money over YouTube, then YouTube comes in and dips there.
Yeah, YouTube takes like 30% if you use the super chat and the live chat. And not only that, but if you're using YouTube via the Apple App Store, then Apple takes 30% and YouTube takes 30% of what's left. So that the creator is, this is the reports I'm hearing from people who use this, who make money on YouTube. Yeah. So then if Apple's involved, then I think the creator ends up with like 45%. So you may not want to spend your money in that way. You may want to go directly to CatholicCulture.org/donate or use the PayPal link. Both of them are tax deductible. Sorry if you already said that. So maybe we can, is that all for introduction? I'm actually going to open this admin page up so that we can see if people donate. Because I'd love to give some shout outs if that happens.
If you do donate over PayPal or on the website, just let us know in the chat so that we can
absolutely
we can thank you.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, you mentioned responsibility just a moment ago. You know, the responsibility of running a Catholic apostolate, and that's something I've taken very seriously in all of these podcasts that we do, and also in our like art criticism, like with Criteria, the Catholic Film Podcast, in being responsible as a critic in, first of all, in our like aesthetic judgments, like not trying to like say things just to thank you very much, Claire. Claire says she donated via PayPal. God bless you. Thank you for that. We appreciate you. What was I saying? Yeah. So with our art criticism, of course, try to be charitable, especially to, you know, living artists who are trying to make a living, you know,
Sure.
not trying to say things to be just for clout, as people say. It's just to be, you know, provocative.
At the
or
outset
whatever.
of Criteria, you actually sort of resisted the idea of calling ourselves critics. Or
Yeah,
what we were doing
I think
as
so.
criticism.
Yeah.
But you just described it that way just now, so clearly your thinking has evolved.
Well, I mean, you have to admit it at a certain point.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
Yeah.
I think that at the beginning I was thinking like, well, we're not professional critics. We're just a couple of guys trying to figure this stuff out. And that's still, you know, because we're not experts. Maybe that's the most important thing to say.
Yeah.
You know, because yeah. So anyway, but we also try to be responsible with the morality of it, more in a more specific way regarding, you know, the art that we recommend, how we talk about these things, taking seriously the moral element of the films and other artworks that we discuss.
Right, because we've been moving through the Vatican film list, and
Yeah.
there's a certain extent to which you can take for granted that these aren't going to be beyond the pale,
Right.
you know, but a lot of the films, as we've been going through, have brought up sort of tension points
Right.
about, you know,
Yeah.
is this something that's really able to be given like a full-throated recommendation?
This is something we'll talk about when we do our wrap up
Yeah.
episode on the Vatican film list, because we finished all 45 films like last week, amazingly. So all we have to do is do the wrap up episode on that. So that's 3 years of work, pretty much.
Yeah.
You know, in the can. So
Still not experts.
yeah, that's right.
Still just a couple of guys.
Yeah. Well, you know what's actually, by the way, it's cool. We already have more viewers than we did when we did it 8 p.m. last week when I did my live stream with Mike Aquilina, and that's why we moved it to noon, because we thought like maybe this is a more convenient time for people. Maybe people are more likely to be browsing YouTube during the lunch hour on a weekday or
for
something
sure.
like that. So anyway,
Quick, say something interesting before they leave.
Well, one person just did, so I was like, "Oh no!" It's like blood draining from my veins. But no. So again, yeah, people will get the chance to ask questions and all of that. Yeah. So that brings me to the topic for today's episode, and it's not just about our film criticism. I want to talk about this broader phenomenon of kind of like, at least in the modern era, the like quote unquote like the artistic personality, whether it's like an actual artist or a critic or somebody who just is, you know, particularly attuned to the arts or thinks that they are, you know, in some cases. This tension between art and morality, and I'm not so much interested in coming at it from like a philosophic point of view, in the way that like Jacques Maritain does in his great book, The Responsibility of the Artist. But I want to talk about more like the artistic type of person, and maybe like some of the errors that we can get into about like the relationship of what we do with morality, and some of the like kind of cop outs, and this is very much rooted in my experience, our desire to strike a balance and be responsible in our commentary, but also in my personal experience growing up as you know, a young Catholic musician or somebody who was interested in the arts more generally, and trying to evaluate the different attitudes towards the arts that I saw in the Catholic world. So if you don't mind, James, I'd just like to give a little bit of my own experience
Sure.
to sort of kick this off.
Yeah, and I think that your experience, you know, from what I know of what you will say, I don't think it's like that. I think there's going to be a lot for people to relate to.
Yes.
You know, because we
Yeah,
all
very much
grew
so.
up with like square Christians who like
Right.
didn't like art or good art.
Right.
You know? But anyway, I don't want to spoil the good news. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah. The good news. Good news is a little bit I wouldn't claim that for myself, but well, maybe I should. But yeah, so I mean, to put it bluntly, yeah, I mean, when I was growing up as a kid, not so much in my family, but in like, you know, maybe the Catholic schools. I attended Catholic schools from, you know, kindergarten through my first year of college, and so I had an opportunity to sort of see how people would react to certain things in terms of art and culture and popular entertainment and things like that. And you know, as a kid, I was pretty sheltered when it came to movies and music, and I would say in my home in a good way. In fact, I honestly wish I was sheltered more, like as a teenager. I wish there was more oversight over, and this isn't a criticism of my parents as well at all, but like, you know, it probably would have been even better to shelter me, to like exercise more oversight over, you know, my internet usage or like the music that I was listening to, things like that. But I'm thinking more about my experience in school. You know, I went to a Catholic elementary school where, like, just to give an example, and this is not something it's just an example, not a particularly important one, but you know, Pokemon cards were banned in my elementary school because and from what I heard, it was because they were, you know, potentially demonic or something like that. And again, I'm not like at all resentful of that, but it's just an example of the sort of like the atmosphere, you know, and the teachers could really overreact to, like, you know, things that were kind of innocent in terms of like what movies the kids would be talking about during lunch, or, you know, that kind of things. So there was this kind of like suspicion or this fear of, like, you know, problems in art and entertainment that could be a little bit neurotic, although like well-founded, you know, in retrospect in some ways. And then, you know, I don't know, high school, no real problems there. But and then I went to Christendom College for my first year of college, and what I found was, I mean, there was something in the atmosphere where there was just a sort of like suspicion of art and music. Like, I think that the culture there has changed quite a bit since then. And by the way, I'm allowed to say this. My dad was a founder of one of the founders of Christendom, and like he wouldn't be offended at all that I'm saying this about the college. But at the time, I remember like trying to organize a jazz concert at the school with some like great jazz musicians that I knew, and like I was able to do it, but I wasn't able to do it like officially, like under the aegis of the college, because basically the concern was that like too many like people from the community, or like parents or donors or something, I don't know who exactly, would be complaining and like, you know, shocked that Christendom would allow a jazz concert. You know what I'm saying? So so that's obviously overboard. But so that's the sort of thing I'm talking about. That's where I'm coming from as a young person, somebody who is like really interested. By the time I'm in college, I'm planning on transferring, going to music school already by that time, and I'm not finding a lot of people I relate to in my interest in the arts, which is a problem in life in general, not just the Catholic world, but specifically this kind of like moral suspicion, like this undue moral suspicion of certain art forms and things like that, that you know, could lead a young person to sort of like react in the opposite direction. And so I did, you know, when I was younger, to some extent react in the opposite direction. Like, I'm not going to be offended by anything. Like, I'm going to listen to whatever I want. It's not going to affect me. Like, you know, that kind of stuff. But as I got older, you know, after I graduated from music school, and was kind of like, or during college too, was kind of looking for more people in the Catholic world that I could relate to or sort of look up to, and sort of like a community that I could be a part of who was really open to the arts and things like that. I remember I found this, I'm not going to name names, but I found this this journal, a pretty prominent German journal, not a specifically Catholic journal, run by a Catholic, of religion and the arts, that was pretty big at the time. I haven't heard much about it recently. I know it's still going, but I don't know if it's as significant now in the Catholic arts scene as it was at one point. But you know, I was like really stoked. I was like reading the writings of the editor, and like, wow, like this is like my guy, you know, like there's somebody out there doing what I think is important, and like I finally found like a world that I can be a part of. And over time, I started getting like a little bit like more disillusioned with some of the things that were being published. But I had this like very like formative experience at one point where I the journal, I don't think it was published in the journal, but it was like their social media. They were promoting this interview by this so-called Catholic poet. I think it was an interview with the Washington Post. And she was saying some, like, she wrote this book of poems all about Mary. But the things she was saying in the interview were, like, very, like, sketchy. Like, and, like, seemingly blasphemous. And she was sort of complaining, like, well, like, you know, Mary, I'm not comfortable with this idea of, like, Mary being held up as, like, virgin and mother. Because, like, I'm not a virgin and I'm not a mother. And so, like, you know, she's kind of, like, trying to deconstruct Mary in these poems. And I looked at some of her poems, and I was like, I don't know about this. So I remember I like messaged the editor who I had met by that point in person, and I think we were friends on Facebook at the time. And I was like, do you really want to be promoting this woman who's writing like blasphemous poetry? And he basically just like totally gaslit me. And it almost worked because I really looked up to him, and I wasn't like as certain in my judgment. I think I was either in college, in music school, or like right out of college at that point. And he was like, he basically said like, oh, I didn't realize like you were one of those people who like sees blasphemy around every corner in art, or is looking for that. And I totally wasn't looking for that. You know, I was trying to give a generous reading of this woman's poetry. And when he said that, I actually like went back and like gave it another look, and I was like, no, man, I'm pretty sure I'm right about this. I don't even want to get into the details about what she was saying in the poems, but the point is that like it was at that point, like, especially because it came from someone that I really looked up to, it was like all the more like stinging and like disillusioning that like, oh, so I guess there's like people who have reacted in the opposite direction, and people who are like, they care more about like what they think is like being an artistic and like open than they do about like the Catholic value of the work, and they're like hiding behind ambiguity and all this stuff for whatever reasons I don't know.
Right.
But so that was like a turning point. I mean, first of all, I think that was the point where I was like, well, I'm just never gonna find like a scene that I can like totally belong to outside of like the church. Amen. Broadly speaking, you know, so that was like formative in that sense, but also just like realizing and like being more cautious about like, oh, okay, so there's like artistic Catholics out there who like, they might even be Orthodox in their doctrine, but they are like, they have this like blinder on, or I don't know exactly what's going into it for them, but not really a Catholic attitude towards the arts. And so the other tendency that I've noticed over the years with some Catholics who are very artistic, or film critics, for example, is like, it's almost like they don't think it worth mentioning if a film has like something in it that would be like an occasion of sin, or some moral problem in it, that like it's almost like taken for granted, or it's like, well, that's beside the point artistically, or like they're too cool for school to actually bring that up as like a demerit in the work of art. And so that's why we've tried to be very open, you know, in these criteria episodes, like give a generous reading of things, and demonstrate the openness to unusual and strange works of art that we've always like found somewhat lacking in the Catholic world, and are hoping to cultivate that with our podcasts and our commentary, but also to like just be like very like staunchly like proper Catholic sensibilities, you know, and so yeah, I mean that's kind of where I'm coming from in discussing this topic, is like that there seems to be people who think that being an artist or being artistic means like, oh, well, like we're now in this artistic world and sort of like anything goes, or you know, you can't really judge a work of art morally because it's doing something else, or it's almost like it's not like they've totally embraced like the Oscar Wilde like ethos of like immoralism or amoralism in art, but like there's almost like a tinge of that, like a false like romanticization or like a mystification of art in the moral respect. Sure. So I don't know where you want to jump in on that, but that's where I'm coming from in this discussion, and the balance that I want to strike is like in contrast to both of those, that the over suspicion and the kind of like overly loose attitude.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully people kind of get what you're talking about. I think that especially if you're an artist, this is not an uncommon experience. And I think it's maybe even broader than the Catholic world or the church. I think it's just sort of something kind of essential about artists is that they're not understood. You know, if you're not an artist, there's just only so much that you can understand about the artistic heart. And so there's going to be a lot of places where you may, you know, in a very well-meaning way, try to, you know, suggest or exhort or correct an artist, and it's just going to fall flat because you're just not thinking on that artistic wavelength. And that's not, I'm not talking about in matters of like morality. I'm talking then about in matters of like the world. You know, we've received, if you're an artist, you've received tons of worldly wisdom, you know, from well-meaning non-artists, and like very little of it has been helpful. And so I think that like the experience of alienation is something that's already kind of like the common state of a lot of artists. Right. You know, especially if you grow up in like suburbia. Yeah. You know, where it's like, what, you gonna make a living with that or something? Right. You know. But then, certainly, when you introduce into that religion, matters of religion, you know, there's all sorts of new variables that present themselves, and one of them might be a certain overzealousness in, you know, condemning things. Right. There's like a certain kind of, there's like an easy certainty that maybe some people will like go to religion for, right? And then they're kind of making an idol out of like a system of thinking, and that's not really childlike faithfulness, right?
And some people who are looking for art are looking for an easy uncertainty.
Totally. And
which is what I encountered with this magazine that I was subscribing to.
Being childlike is scandalous to both of those schemas. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Know, so that is when you describe like this, you know, just not being too cool for school and just like,
not trying to be like urbane seem urbane by avoiding like the like seemingly square like moral.
Look, you know, I'm a child, and a child sees what he sees, and you know the adults in the room might have like, you know, all sorts of sophisticated reasonings for blinding themselves to something, you know, or not talking about it. But childlikeness, whether it's in matters of religion or matters of art, you know, it's always dealing with the reality. Right. So I think that's you know, if we had like a list of principles for our art criticism, you know, that might be one of them, is like a certain childlike adherence to the real.
Well said. I think there are some like legitimate things in the artistic spirit that lead them to be being, especially today, being an artist is associated with like being open-minded, you know. You know, and there's something to that, because artists are kind of like they are looking for anything that they can just like feed into their engine, you know, their creative engine. And they are artists precisely because they can like see things that other people can't see, or in a way that other people can't see it as well. And so there's going to be like you're searching for something deeper, or you're searching for something. You're fascinated by the specific. You're fascinated by the universal. You're investigating all aesthetics, all areas of human experience, while working within a specific tradition. But that spirit of openness, if it just sort of left to itself, can also lead art to become, ironically, like closed in on itself or self-referential, in that like it assimilates everything that it touches into like its own like values of like beauty is the only thing that matters, or like just exploring is the only thing that matters. So it's almost like if that spirit of artistic openness becomes like the ultimate principle, then like everything else gets like all other values become neutralized, and like converted into purely artistic values. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah.
And so that's one reason that artists need religion. They need the church, because they need to be like anchored in those values which transcend like the specifics of artistic beauty and like point to like the unity of beauty and truth and goodness and all of those things that like one like beauty in some limited artistic sense of the word can't be like allowed to like absorb everything else into itself, because that also isn't good for art. So that at the point art becomes kind of self-referential, and it loses a lot of its value because it's all just like a game basically.
Sure. Yeah. Well, if people are still sort of unsure of just what it is we're talking about, I can throw in a couple more examples from my life. So like when I was in seminary, I kind of like relished this this like dynamic of the suspicion around art. So like when I went to a seminary in Columbus, Ohio, and once a month there was like a really cool art walk in the arts district, where you could sort of like walk through the arts district and visit different like galleries or studios, and artists might be like selling their wares and stuff, and it was just a lot of fun. And it was like I would invite guys at the seminary, and you could like see their like eyebrows like contort, or in a lot of instances just be like, what? And
you enjoyed that?
Yeah, I did. So I relished it. God bless them. A lot of these guys, would come out with me on the art walks, and then this is maybe a little darker, but then I would sometimes get a certain satisfaction in seeing them be scandalized by things. So this is the kind of Philistinism that we're describing.
Right.
I've been guilty of it myself. It was like we'd go into like a tattoo parlor, and there'd be like some demonic images in there, and these guys with like well-formed consciences and like a proper like spiritual sense were like, yeah, dude, this isn't cool, we should get out of here. And I was like, nah, man, like you gotta just like be with the people, smell the sheep, man.
Yeah,
but it's like it's true that like art can be very complex. Maybe complex is not the right word. There's a lot of depth, in real works of art, and so they can be mined for like a lot of there's all sorts of edification that awaits if one can like spend a long time with something and really sort of like get past like initial ideas about something, or maybe even initial like prejudices or distractions or whatever. And so sometimes do need to be like kind of sturdy and stout and stick with something and mine it, and don't go with the knee-jerk reaction. But in other instances, things are a little clearer, and like a good conscience and like a good moral sense, and really just being close to our Lord is like going to clarify that.
Yeah.
So it's the sophistry, it's like the sophisticated reasonings that are so deadly, because especially if you're an artist who's intellectually gifted, it's like, it's just, you could just like wax eloquent all day to yourself about why, this isn't an issue, and like you're just some sort of prude. So yeah, that's why we're here,
Yeah.
That's the question.
Yeah.
Are we prudes? Are we prudes, people?
Should we open it up for questions?
Totally. That is the first question.
Yeah. Let me remind people, we are doing a fundraiser here for CatholicCulture.org. Anything that you give will be doubled. We're trying to make a $50,000 challenge grant. You can donate on CatholicCulture.org/donate or in PayPal. Both are tax deductible, and see the links in the description. We did get a donation from Dennis W. About 20 minutes ago. I don't know if that's a live stream viewer or just somebody who happened to donate while we were doing
thank
the
you
live
all the
stream.
same.
But thank you very much to Dennis. Now, also, so we're opening it up to questions and comments, and they don't have to be about the specific thing we were just talking about. I mean, we'd love, any follow-up questions or to continue that discussion if people want, but, we do a lot of different stuff. I cover a lot of different things on the Catholic Culture podcast.
Right.
We have a lot of different interests. We do the film podcast. James does Catholic Culture audiobooks. If you guys are familiar with our work or have anything you want to ask about CatholicCulture.org, we're welcoming any kind of discussion about anything, really.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Catholic culture is a lot more than Catholic arts. So, all right.
Fides at Ratio about 20 minutes ago commented, I would love to see you guys review the book, The Dangers of Beauty, the conflict between mimesis and concupiscence in the fine arts. Yeah, I will consider that. Thank you for the recommendation. I'll take a look at that, what that book is. Claire says, I've heard beauty and art described as a perfect combination of order and surprise. Actually, hold on a second. It says that our connection is unstable. So if you're there, oh, it's good now. Okay. Claire continues. It seems that if order and surprise are present equally in both the moral and artistic features of art, the dichotomy can exist in an encouraging, beautiful way in culture. What do you think? Well, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of order and surprise being a part of morality. The moral features as well, but perhaps that's something that art can do for us. Like, let's say you're reading a novel. The novel is not just going to be like, hopefully, like, just like a commonplace, like, example of like textbook moral principles. Hopefully, even if it is dealing with like everyday situations, it's going to illuminate them in a way that surprises you, or it can show you something fresh about morality. So it's not just that the formal qualities of the novel are surprising or its beauty is surprising, but what it's actually saying about its moral content can also be surprising. So yeah, I mean that's a good point. Who talks about this a lot? John Mark Miraval. There's two Miravals. I think it's John Mark Miraval, the son, wrote a book on beauty. I forget if it's called like an introduction, beauty, and what it is and why it matters, something like that. I think it's maybe Ignatius or Sophia. I can't remember who published it. It was a surprisingly for an entry level book about beauty for average Catholics. And I interviewed him on the Catholic Culture podcast. It was a surprisingly deep and fresh take on the subject, and he talked pretty extensively about the order and surprise and why we need both. And so
I remember really enjoying that episode.
Oh,
that was
cool.
a really good one.
Great. Yeah, it's a nice little book for sure. Hey, Claire, I wonder if you've read that book. Or maybe it was our friend Aaron who read that one. I know one of you I talked about with. But yeah, what do you think about Claire's? She was referring it to culture. Yeah. We haven't touched how that can exist in culture.
Yeah.
So,
well, it seems to me because one way of describing order and surprise another way of putting it might just be order and chaos. You hear a lot about those. Sort of poles, but
I don't necessarily prefer that way of putting it. That's the Peterson way of putting it.
Totally. But I'm framing it in a way that maybe people have heard this sort of idea before.
Right.
But I like the word surprise because I think especially when applied to art, because I think it approaches much more closely the sort of poetic phenomenon where the poet is surprised by something, something sort of captures the artist, and then the artist has that ability to basically through an artificial way do the same for others. Surprise, it makes me think about improvisation, which is it's like a practical virtue of, it's like prudence, basically. Prudence in the moral life is what enables you to improvise. But you can't improvise without a really strong foundation,
right?
A really strong grasp of the rudiments, and that's order. So it's a careful, it's a tough needle to thread, because there needs to be a certain rigidity when it comes to the fundamentals. That's appropriate there, But then there needs to be a looseness and an ability to respond when it comes to things that are like several degrees removed from the fundamentals.
We hear a lot about talk about the God of surprises, today, right? And make a mess and that kind of stuff. And that sometimes means just like kind of like just disregarding or like relativizing the fundamentals. But it is necessary. I mean, and so I think this order and surprise thing, of course, God is perfectly ordered. God is ever ancient, ever new. Surprise is obviously something that is relative to our experience, not to God's experience.
Right.
But I think our need for it goes in a contemplative area, aside from what you just said about the need to respond to new situations and things like that, it arises from the inability of our intellects to fully comprehend reality and to comprehend God. And so surprise is that, like, surprise, I think, is to some extent, it's another manifestation of God's order, but it's like allowing that order to break in on us rather than thinking that we have it all like figured out.
It says something about our human weakness, and so it suggests a disposition of humility. If I'm open to being surprised, it's because I'm lowly, and I acknowledge my limitedness, my creatureliness. So a lot of times when we're talking about art, for instance, when it comes to like the order and the discipline, the rules, those in a lot of instances are there to get you out of the way. I know from an acting perspective, a lot of the rules that I adhere to, a lot of the method is to actually sort of negate myself, how to just get myself out of the way so that the real impulse can be liberated and affirmed. So, and I think that in the moral life this is true too. A lot of our sort of default responses to things are frankly demonic, or at the very least just flawed and small, but a big part of the moral life is like training yourself to get out of God's way, so like stop insisting on my way or the highway, my reasoning, my limited judgments, and my ways are not your ways,
One thing that strikes me about like in the church is that like it's like rigidity is a real problem. Unfortunately, people dismiss any critique of rigidity because it's so often used as like a code for like orthodoxy, or like undeviating correctness. But like, what I notice is that even a lot of the people who are railing against rigidity, just like the sort of people who rail against hypocrisy, are themselves quite rigid. They're it's not like they're these like free spirits, it's like they have their own like pet issues like everybody else. And so, it's striking to me that like, I think one of the reasons we have trouble getting beyond this rigidity is that like the order, like the basics aren't there. And so like a lot of the people who are rigid in the sort of more like obvious stereotypical sense, in like a sort of a conservative sense, I think are either because like we have to be cautious because there are so many like attacks and sneak attacks on the church in various ways. Just as somebody might be overly cautious with art precisely because it is so abused, to the detriment of, morality, very often. Also because I think, it's often observed that people who are very rigid can be the people who are struggling the most in a certain area. So they're sort of like trying to push themselves and others to live up to a certain standard. So like somebody who is like secure in those things, like in like the moral virtues and things, doesn't have to be rigid in like the negative sense. There's a certain like we've talked about, like in the acting context, like suppleness,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
to like the face that this moral life presents.
Right.
Even if it is like undeviating and strict in certain in important ways. Likewise, you know, the people who are rigid in their critique of rigidity are, I think that they are, like, it's their lack of freedom and like rootedness in the truth and in the moral virtues that like leads them to be like constantly like so hung up on rigidity, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that's what we try not to do in the podcast. Like, I'm not like when I'm condemning, like, you know, a lascivious scene in a film, I'm not stressed out. I'm not rigid. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like I'm just calling it like it is. You know what I mean? Like so that's I'm not hung up on it. I'm just like, you know, is God hung up on you know, the people who go to hell, or like you know what I mean?
Totally.
Like I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have anything more to say about this. I mean, there's obviously endless things you could say about order and surprise in art and culture. But I think, I mean, discipline and freedom go together. And so the same in culture. It can be, even with like tradition, like talks about like traditional liturgy and stuff, is like, it's really easy to be rigid when you can't just like take the tradition for granted. So like the more the tradition is threatened or like obliterated, like the more people who are trying to recover it like either are or like appear to be rigid, because it's not just second nature anymore.
Right.
So I mean, you could examine this on every level of religion and culture if you wanted to.
Totally. Yeah. But yeah, structure and freedom have this kind of essential relationship with each other, especially as far as we are concerned as fallen beings. We require structure in order to be free. And so, you know, that's what Jesus is all about, and what life with Jesus is all about, you know, is he is the way, and that is the only freedom. He is the only freedom.
Claire says, this is awesome. Heading out now. Thanks for this conversation and all that you do. Thank you for being here, Claire. We love you. This is Claire's a good friend of ours, IRL, and thank you very much for your donation as well.
Yeah.
Now, what was I going to say?
Now that Claire, that loudmouth, is out of the stream, we can get some other voices in here.
My gosh.
You know?
Nah. I'd be fine if it was just all Claire.
Totally.
For an hour and a half.
Totally.
No, but one more thing I was going to say on that is tying this back to what we do. I mentioned I'm actually going to look up the episode numbers of the episode that I just recommended, because there's 2 episodes of the Catholic Culture podcast that both touch on this. For people who want to explore it further, one of them is episode 53, God Made Us for Order and Surprise, with John Mark Miraval. You can find that on catholicculture.org or on our YouTube channel here. And the other one is an interview with my favorite podcast guest ever, Mark Christopher Brandt. I think it was episode 33. Sorry, I'm just looking for this episode. Episode 33, Structure and Freedom in Music and in Christ. I mean, he has an actual DVD about structure and freedom.
Yeah.
So that's why we use that title in the episode. So yeah, both of those episodes are excellent, both in terms of the moral life and the spiritual life and the artistic life for discussing that structure and freedom further. Let me just... so yeah, anybody who is watching... Remember, we are trying to raise funds to continue Catholic Culture till for the most of the rest of the year. We've got a $50,000 matching grant. You can go to catholicculture.org/donate. Your donation will be doubled, or you can go to PayPal, where your donation will also be doubled, and those are both tax deductible. So we would appreciate. We pray for our benefactors daily, so we're grateful to anybody who can help. I see we have a bit fewer people watching right now, but any of you who have just been lurking there, please ask us a question. We want or a comment. Anything about the topics we've been discussing. Anything about random questions about art that you have, movies. Anything you want to know about what's coming up with any of our podcasts. You want to get a sneak peek of what we're working on. Any of that stuff, we're open to discussing whatever. We're not going to go longer than an hour and a half, 1:30 p.m. Eastern time on this. We won't necessarily go that long if people don't have more questions. But we'll probably keep it up at least till 1 p.m. Eastern time and longer if people have more questions. While we're waiting for somebody to comment, James. Maybe people will be interested in hearing about your unexpected encounter with Cardinal Burke yesterday.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was cool. So yesterday was Mother's Day. Happy belated Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. But yeah, I guess at our parish, St. Vincent Ferrer, in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, there must be somebody with some sort of connection to Cardinal Burke, because he was just there celebrating 9:30 a.m. Mass on Mother's Day.
Because there was a big, was it Corpus Christi, where he was there before I was out of town?
Yes.
But that was like advertised.
Yeah, and there was a big procession
to the cathedral. This was like under the radar, so that's kind of cool.
We just showed up to Mass and like, oh, there's Cardinal Burke. And it was great, and then afterward there was a light breakfast served for the mothers and their families, and Cardinal Burke was there. He gave a little address to the mothers and of course gave his blessing. He also had given these little gifts were at each of the tables, medals, blessed medals of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and a holy card of Saint Gianna Beretta, and also some seeds. He was like,
nice.
he was stoked on spring and new life, and
that's
so
awesome.
he blessed the seeds too.
That's great.
Yeah, just like a super neat, way to kick off Mother's Day.
What a nice cardinal.
Totally.
My pastor told me that Cardinal Burke and Cardinal Dolan are, quote, like best friends, which is why maybe Cardinal Dolan, part of the reason he hasn't done anything to restrict the Latin Mass, perhaps, who knows. But I thought that was interesting. We wouldn't necessarily like immediately expect that.
Sure.
Although I guess they are like the two like conservative American cardinals.
Right.
Come on, people. We can't just talk about our personal lives the whole time. You gotta ask us some questions here. I know there's 4 people watching. I don't know if that includes us watching ourselves. Probably not. I think it's detecting we're on StreamYard.
Yeah. Well, surely there's more that we can say on our own.
Sure.
Having to do with this subject. We picked it after all. Yeah, I mean, there's something about maturity in the artistic life and in the moral life that goes beyond, that has to like get beyond an initial like counterculturalism or reactionaryism.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, part of what my experience was. I already mentioned when I was in seminary, sort of being a little reactionary, a little edgy, sort of relishing that in the seminary. But then when I left the seminary and went to art school, it was like the total opposite end of the spectrum. And so there I sort of relished being a little more hardline and a little more old school and traditional and certainly just religious.
Right.
But at a certain point, you kind of have to like get over that.
Yeah. And I'm that kind of personality as well. I mean, I definitely remember. I remember my elementary school teachers, like some of them would be just so easily like upset or offended by like nothing that like I actually remember like making a commitment when I was like in elementary school, like I'm not going to be offended by anything. And like that had like bad consequences.
Totally.
Because I was just like reacting against this like neurotic approach, and I remember I wouldn't like care about what the lyrics were of like the music that I listened to in high school, and I regret that. I had to like clinically like teach myself how to be like offended
Yeah.
by things I should be offended by in my young adulthood.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to think about what that has meant for me as someone who has at different times in his life really enjoyed being provocative or countercultural or whatever, reactionary. And I think that one of the biggest parts of that, the big task, is getting over myself, because at the end of the day, it's self-love, it's vanity, it's arrogance.
Right.
You know, it's about me.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you hear Catholic artists talk about it in these terms, like, oh, you know, like, have you ever been like really lonely among your religious friends, and then also like really lonely among your artist friends, and like, do you just feel like a black sheep wherever you go? And it's like, I get it. I get what is being described there, because that there's like a real there's a real alienation to be experienced in these different groups. You described it, Thomas, in like having to realize one day that you were just never going to find your scene.
Right.
And the thing is like at a certain point you do have to kind of get over yourself and say like Jesus is my scene.
It's okay to be just a normal Catholic.
Totally.
And appear like one.
Totally. You know, and like I don't need to fit in.
Yeah.
And I also don't need to have people understand me or welcome me or value me. I mean, these are all great things, you know, and God has given us friendship and family and love and the church for that matter, you know. Mm-hmm. But that's, you know, if that becomes like what it's all about, then that can lead us down some twisted paths of search for human respect and really contorting ourselves to match that. And I'm not lonely. Look, I'm not lonely.
Right.
I'm a Catholic artist, and I have friends. I have people in my life who love me, and more than that, I have our Lord. I have the sacraments. I have prayer, you know? And does that mean I never encounter people who don't understand me? No, of course that happens all the time. But like, you know, you learn to suffer that and to no longer be like thinking so much about like what you're getting from other people,
right,
in terms of like their like attention or recognition or acceptance. And then you start thinking about, well, what can I give? And that's the thing, is like for artists, that is the only metric. What can I give? You know, God gave you these gifts for a reason, and it's not so that you can like crowd up with your scene and like hang out with other artists and just feel like very like coddled and taken care of. You know, sure, like have artistic friendships, have you know, friendships, faithful friendships, friendships rooted in Christ, you know. These are all important, but like, what is the end to that? What's the goal? The goal is the salvation of souls. I mean, your salvation and the building of the kingdom of God. So, you know, God's given you these gifts. Use them. I'm exhorting myself more than anybody else because, you know, this has been a big trap for me because I think that there's all sorts of temptations around the identity of being an artist, of like the sort of mystique of that and the allure and just the coolness of it, right. You know, and we live in like a moment in history where like the artist is like really sort of like in some respects like held up as though they were like, you know, from another planet. And again, in some respects, artists are from another planet, but it's not so that they can be like, you know, like, oh, look at me and like how great I am. It's a vocation of service and of gift,
right?
You know, so that's but that's true for all Christians, right? So anybody who's converting, right, is in the process of conversion, has to get over themselves and has to get over like, yeah, but like I'm like a special Catholic, you know? It's like, bro, you're fallen like the rest of us. You're a sinner. You know, I used to like love in an inordinate way, like where I came from, you know, and like what I'd done on the outside before I came into the fold of Christ, you know, and it's like, it's so, you know, just vanity.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. So.
Well, that was a beautiful conclusion. Now I want to like change the title of this once it publishes on YouTube to something about, because I think art versus moral is a false dichotomy. It actually ended up being about like coping as an artist in the Catholic world as well, you know, and like really about like the like social aspect of being an artist. And so I don't know. I might actually change the title and the thumbnail because for people who find this later, so that artists who are specifically struggling with this problem, Catholic artists, will see that and you know, zero in on that, because I don't think there's a lot of like really in-depth discussion.
But
about
you know,
that
like before we close up, like let me just like exhort any artists who may be listening to this, and I guess this is for everybody, you know, but like, you know, just don't be afraid of human respect, and don't be too cool for school. Don't be too cool for the fundamentals, for order, you know, for structure, because the structure that Christ brings into your life, that is only with a view to liberate you. And so just try it out. Just try out with your artistic criticism, you know, whether it's like professional or otherwise, you know, anytime like someone sets something in front of you and asks for your account of it, you know, try to resist the like sophistry and the sort of like need to like come up with something, you know, clever to say about this film or about this artwork or something, you know. You don't try to sound smart. Just talk about what you see. Just begin there. And I guarantee you'll be surprised at how much you see. You know, if you just start simple and you just like call it like it is. And then that's also true for the moral stuff, you know, like don't be too cool for school to call a lascivious scene, you know, for what it is. But you'll be surprised.
Yeah.
Because like when we start submitting to the easy yoke of Christ, that is where we start to transcend our limitations and our fallenness and our smallness. And that's where we start to be surprised by what we find, even in ourselves. And then we're able to be surprising to others. And so then you're going to find, whoa, I actually do have surprising things to say to people, you know, and they're going to appreciate what I have to say.
Right.
But it's not going to be because like you're so smart and you're so wonderful. It's going to be because like you are working at getting yourself out of the way, and it's a rigorous thing, you know. But
okay, so a couple people just came in. I do want to give people to ask questions if anybody wants to. I'm gonna give it like 3 minutes, and then if nobody has a question, then we're gonna end.
Well,
this.
maybe we'll say one more thing about the fundraising campaign.
Sure, yeah.
Because that's the whole reason we're doing this. Is we're in the middle of this Queen of May campaign, and really it's a little bit past the middle. We've only got 9 days left in this campaign. We're trying to raise $50,000 so that we can win a challenge grant of another $50,000. So it's $100,000 on the line. Your gift right now can help us reach that goal, and if it does, then it's going to count for twice. You know, it's going to be doubled. So even a little gift can make a really big impact. But like I said at the outset of this, our Queen of May campaign is all about the Queen of May. This is Our Lady's month, and so we're asking for you to pray for the church, to pray for our internet apostolate, and to take heart, to be encouraged, to just trust in Our Lady's help. This is not a time for Catholics to be discouraged, and it's not a time for Catholics to be cowed, and it's not a time for Catholics to be worried about inflation. And you know, I mean, of course, like we have to be sensible. I'm not going to make any assumptions about what you, listener or viewer, can or cannot afford. But it's just, this is a time for us to really be encouraged and not worry about the state of the world, not worry about what God is doing, to trust that God is at work, and He knows what He's up to, and just to the day's evil is sufficient. You know, we just go on day to day, walking with our Lord. If you can afford it, or if you feel that God's putting it on your heart to help out this apostolate, if you benefit from the work that we do, then please shoot us a donation. You can go to catholicculture.org/donate/audio, or you could donate over PayPal. And if you can't afford it, or if you just don't feel like there are other places where my money can do more good, so be it. Please pray for us. More importantly, pray for the church. This campaign is about like awareness of the month too. You know, it's like, did you know that May is Our Lady's month? We need to like bulk up before June comes along, you know, because and then when we're in June, not only are we trying to get into our Lord's Sacred Heart, but we're also like up against some obnoxious things in the culture, you know, right. who would have June be about something else. So May is a great time to take stock, you know, and prepare. And so that's very much what this fundraising campaign, this Queen of May campaign, is about. Okay. So
30 more seconds. Ask your questions. If not, we're pressing the self-destruct button on this
Any
baby.
questions about art and morals? A false dichotomy.
Or anything else.
Under
the sun.
Ask me anything. AMA.
I don't know if the listeners can hear my roommate laughing it up on the phone in the next room.
Maybe he's watching and he's just laughing at our buffoonery.
Possibly.
Well, thank you to everyone who has joined in on this.
Whoa. Question. Keith Buckner. Thank you, Keith.
Yes!
Yeah.
Go for it, Keith.
We got to have more than one question in the entire Q&A. Should I watch 1927 Napoleon in one sitting?
Okay. I was the one who watched it in as close to one sitting. I watched it in 2 sittings. And I think that one sitting would be very exciting.
One sitting meaning in one day with intermissions.
Yes, you definitely need to take intermissions, and the film gives you that because there are 2 large halves, but even those halves are broken up. So I would definitely recommend just like feeling the full movement of that, taking a leisurely day to watch this film, you know, and then on the intermissions, you know, pause it even. Extend that intermission a little bit, live with it. The film is already so like interesting in the kind of psychological in its effort to sort of enter into the psychological space and to illustrate it of Napoleon and these different stages, that like I think that there's definitely something to be said for like letting that whole thing work on you.
Right.
And we've had an analogous experience when we watched Das Boot together in one sitting.
Yeah.
The full extended series.
Yeah.
What was that, like 9 hours or something?
No, it was 5.
Oh, really? I guess
it was 5 or 6
well,
at the most.
But it was awesome, and it's a lot of fun when the opportunity presents itself to like to just kind of luxuriate in something like that,
right.
You know, and the other thing that Napoleon has going for it is that it's very snappy. So there are some segments that like slow down a bit, you know, but actually the film is, I think on the podcast I said that it felt really fresh. It feels very contemporary. There's action and drama and humor and a lot of really interesting camera work and awesome set pieces, and the big battle in like the middle of the film it's just so awesome. I was on the edge of my seat through the whole sequence. So I think it's definitely very watchable. It's not like watching some sort of like ponderous, art film for 5 hours. You're actually watching some really cool historical epic. And
Right.
then, and then who knows, you might be like so excited that you go and you get a Napoleon haircut.
Yeah. Okay, well, are we going to get a second wind here with some more questions? That's possible.
Maybe.
4 people in the comments. I mean, in the viewer.
I've got nothing better to do.
Yeah, man, I've got a doctor's appointment, but it's in like 2 hours, an hour and 20 minutes, so I'm good. Hello.
Thomas, you got
You're welcome,
anything
Keith.
cool coming down the pipeline in Catholic
Yeah,
Culture
might as
Podcast?
well talk about it, even if people don't ask about it. Yes, dude, I just got in the can, as we say in the biz, an interview with Matthew Meinard. Everybody loves Matthew Meinard. Everybody knows Matthew Meinard. Matthew Meinard told me, I didn't say this on the episode, but he told me that the episode I did with him in 2019 was the first podcast he ever did, which made me feel really good because since then he just went on like a wicked streak of like podcast interviews and lectures during like the pandemic and stuff on Garrigou, Lagrange, and Aquinas and stuff. Matthew Meinard is best known as having translated a number of works by the great French Thomist Father Reginald Garrigou Lagrange, and he recently sort of completed that phase of his life. I think he pretty much translated almost all the major things by Garrigou that he wanted to. But he also translated the new edition of this sort of definitive scholarly biography of Aquinas by French Dominican Father Jean-Pierre Torel. And so I had him on to discuss that. And it's a great interview. I edited it 2 days ago, and I found myself... often when I edit an episode, I'm like listening to it at like 1.5 speed just to get through it quicker. Especially because I just had the conversation. So like I might be interested in listening back to it later, but not necessarily like the day after that I recorded it. In this case, I listened back to the whole thing at like normal speed. And I thought that was a good sign that like the episode was like engrossing.
Nice.
We talked a lot about, I'm titling it The Vocation of Thomas Aquinas. This episode won't come out until probably early June because I'm going to be traveling for like 3 weeks. So I'm just like hoarding that up to put out while I'm away. Yeah, it's about like it's like a deep dive into like why he became a Dominican rather than a Benedictine, and like what were his duties as a master of theology, and like writing commentaries and preaching and like disputing questions, and a lot of like you'll learn a lot about like the structure of the university education and theology of the time, like Dominican formation of the time. So it's really interesting. The circumstances under which books like the Summa were written. And then I'm supposed to be recording something about the Dominican Rosary pilgrimage that's happening this year tomorrow. Hopefully that'll happen.
Cool.
And on Criteria, we have to do our wrap up. We're gonna do a review of the Padre Pio movie that's coming out.
Yeah.
That'll all be in the next, that'll happen in May and early June or something like that. Then we're going to have to figure out what to do after we're done with the Vatican film list.
Totally.
I know that we're going to do Apocalypto because I've been wanting to do that forever. But we might tackle some other directors. We'll definitely tackle like some of the other church documents about film, like the encyclical by Pius XI on film, and the like addresses given by Pius XII to representatives of the Italian film industry on like titled The Ideal Film, which is quite interesting. What about you, James?
Yeah, well, we're still trudging along through Introduction to the Devout Life. I've got like a big episode coming down the pipeline of many chapters recorded. It's going to be like well over an hour long.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and then but then looking further ahead, I know I'm really excited about getting into some more Benedict XVI. We've already featured some works by Ratzinger and Benedict on the podcast, on the audiobooks podcast,
right.
but we want to tackle his larger encyclicals. So very excited about that. And yeah.
So, and you are still making your way through Newman's idea of a university.
But we're almost done with that. I mean, because we're not gonna do the whole thing. We're just doing the first part.
At least for now.
Yeah, at least for now. Yeah. So yeah, we'll be wrapping up that too.
Yeah.
But,
But yeah, we're gonna get into some cool stuff later in the year. We're also gonna try to. I know you're gonna try to finish the rest of the works of the Apostolic Fathers this year. And we've done almost all of them.
Shepherd of Hermas.
The Shepherd of Hermas and the Letter of Barnabas. Yep. And maybe, I don't know if there's some fragments we can do or
Shepherd
something.
of Hermas is going to be really cool because there's like some trippy sequences.
Have you read any of it yet?
Yeah, I read it at the outset.
Good.
When I was doing research.
Cool, I didn't realize you had already read it. I love the part, and I'm sure you did as well, about double-mindedness, like the dangers of like not praying without trusting and stuff. I thought that was really good. Well, you know. Oh, the other thing with podcast, Mike Aquilina, we talked about in the last live stream, but he just started season 3 of Way of the Fathers, which is covering important early cities of the early church.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions, people? I see another person just joined. We went from 3 viewers to 4 viewers.
It was just the same person, like who dropped out and was like, "Oh no, gotta get back in."
Yeah. Who knows?
But we've got another live stream too coming up.
Oh right.
So
we got to point that out.
Yeah.
Now it was originally scheduled for. This is going to be with Jeff Mirus and Phil Lawler, who write for CatholicCulture.org. The sort of the old guard, if they won't be offended by us calling
no,
them
but
that.
also like the
mainstay,
the celebrities.
the bedrock
These are the headlining event. You know?
That's right. Yeah. So that would have been at 8 p.m. on next Monday, but I think we're going to do it based on we got more viewers for this at this time than we did at the 8 p.m. last time. So I think we'll probably move it earlier in the day. I don't know if we'll do it at noon like today, or if we'll do it like in mid-afternoon.
Yeah,
I'll
let's
ask
split
them.
the difference.
I'll ask them. I don't know what their availability is, but we're gonna do it. I'm gonna say afternoon of Monday. Monday, the 22nd. Monday the 22nd. Yeah, and so. Yeah, I'll stay tuned for that. If anybody's still listening to this,
that'll certainly be a more interesting conversation than whatever we've managed to drum up today.
I don't know. All right, I thought it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, but they've been around the block. They know.
On the other hand, they're not professional podcasters like we are, so we'll see.
They are not experts.
Yeah, not podcasting. An expert in and we don't have expertise in any particular subject matter. We're just good at like. Blah, 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 into the microphone. Maybe that doesn't make the conversation interesting, but it means that we know what distance to sit from the microphone. Okay, well,
thank you again for joining us on this journey of blah, 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 blah.
That's right. Yeah. All right. Okay, we're ending it. We're shooting this one in the head, point blank. See you guys later. Oh, I have to do 2 clicks to end that.